Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature, the amazing antelope of Africa with expedition leader Rich De Gouveia. Rich, thank you very much for being here with us. I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Colby, and thank you guys for joining me. I am really excited about a different topic and something that people probably wouldn't think is something that would be too exciting. But these incredible creatures that we're going to talk about through this presentation are something that you will see on a very regular basis on the safari. They fill in the gaps between the big five, between the big and scaries, and often are overlooked for their purpose, their evolutionary brilliance, their different roles they play. And as antelope, they're the ones that are converting plant energy, or these herbivores converting plant energy into something useful that the predators can then get to and move through the system of the larger mammals. So your different types of antelope, the way they work, they always have a cloven hoof, so two hooves or two parts to their feet. And these guys have four stomachs. They are what we would call a ruminant. And a ruminant, as boring as it sounds, they have four stomachs, three of which work on bacteria to break down the plant material, which we don't get a lot of use of. We obviously get lots of vitamins and stuff when we eat our veggies, but they get the proteins out of them because these bacteria are able to break down the cell walls and then make it useful to the fourth stomach, which digests some of the bacteria and the rest of this plant material before moving it out. Now, we're going to start with the most abundant antelope in Africa, the Impala. And the Impala is one of those that people get bored of pretty quickly because they're around every single corner. So much so that the collective noun for Impala is a couple of Impala. But what people don't realize is just how spectacular this animal is in what it does. The Impala has remained unchanged for 3 million years. Now, I want you to wrap your head around that fact. Things are constantly evolving, constantly changing in order to meet different demands, niches, and as evolution moves it, keep the fittest surviving. These guys have remained unchanged for 3 million years. It's believed that the wildebeest is actually the closest relative of these beautiful creatures, and they are beautiful. Their coats are always in immaculate condition. They have these beautiful shine to it. The only time it looks a little out of place is when there's cold weather, and what happens is like a sleeping bag, it's trying to capture air, so the hair is erect, called a phylloerection, and that connects and collects the air and allows them to store that heat close to them. But in order to groom, they use bottom teeth, which are loose in their sockets, and they're able to comb through their fur to get rid of the parasites. So you go, cool. How many parasites are we talking here? One Impala can be carrying as much as 5,000 ticks and parasites on its body. I'm going to go back to this picture because I just noticed this now. But if we have a close look at this poor lady's legs, these are big ticks that you can see down the legs here. And there are also things called pepper ticks, which if I'm in the bush, they will find me. There's no two ways about it. They will find me. And those little ticks are all over these guys. So they have this grooming where they will groom one another. They will groom each other. So in the places they can't reach, like the face or parts of the body that they can't reach themselves, like their own necks, they are often referred to as McDonald's because of these black lines actually look like the golden arches, except in black. But this is a strategic thing. Most animals have black and white on the rear end, which are follow me signs. Even lions have black behind the ears. Leopards, black and white behind the ears. Leopard, white underside to the tail. Impala, white underside to the tail. And these black stripes are to try and warm up and pull the ticks away from the anus so that they sit in a place that is easily accessible for them to use those beautiful teeth to be able to get in there and groom. The other thing they'll let is they're the smallest antelope species that will allow a bird called an oxpecker, which sits and grooms out these parasites off of their bodies. Now, we've all heard of a thing called the rut, and impalas are pretty good at it. The first full moon around the end of April or through April, around May, the males start to feel this rush of testosterone. As the days become shorter and the nights become longer, this testosterone starts to build. This is a male here calling, and he does this very low rumble, grumble. It sounds, a lot of guests often ask, was that a lion? And all it is these guys taking dominance and making sure that their territories are held. So territories are really held by these guys only through this rutting period. And what the male does is he starts to take on a harem. He chases all the other males away. He makes himself look big and great, and he tries to cover as many of those females as he can. His next couple of days is all about covering females, all about keeping other males away and fighting with other males. So at this point, he's using a lot of energy, but not a lot of time spent taking in new energy. So at the height of the rut, a male may only hold the territory for up to about 7 days, at which point a new male will come in and start to cover all the females. But what they've found is that the males will never mate with the same female twice. So even this guy that's been kicked out, he doesn't go off to the pub and have a drink and go, oh, I lost my lady, and no job left. He goes off, he gets to the gym, he pumps himself up, he makes himself look big and strong again, and he'll go back and fight for that herd. And through a season, you may have 3 or 4 males moving in and covering the females, each one not covering the females he's covered twice. And at the end of this period of the rut, what will end up happening is 98% of the breeding females will be pregnant. So you have this massive, massive amount of babies that sort of drop between November through the beginning of January. Now, there's a lot of to and fro in science and non-science about impalas being able to hold their births. In my understanding and through the discussions I've had with a lot of zoologists and people who study this stuff, that it would be impossible, but they have an innate sixth sense that allows them to understand when the rains are going to come. So they'll start mating later or earlier according to that. And the only animal that really can go into a holding of a birth is a bat. A bat can do what is called embryonic dispause, where the embryo is just starting to split and multiply its number of cells, and the bat can say, oh, conditions aren't right, let's put you on pause and wait there. But by the time that a baby's a baby inside you, it's already feeding, it's feeding off of you, it's growing. There's no stopping that process. So that will end up coming. Now, impala are food for a lot of things. When they're big and they're strong, you have wild dogs, you have hyenas, you have leopards, you have lions, you've got caracal, which may pull down a large antelope or a large impala. But when the babies come, you have this massive influx. So there has to be a balance. You cannot have populations growing by 30, 40% year on year because there's just not enough space for it. So what ends up happening is other things get in on the act. Things like baboons, who for the whole of summer have fed alongside the impala, have looked after the impala. If they saw a predator, they went, no, and called out and gave an alarm call to say, watch out, there's danger. And the impalas create this great, oh, the baboons are safe, the baboons are safe. But when their babies come, the baboons are into the babies. We have pythons that will eat the babies. We have birds like martial eagles will catch and kill and hoist these babies into the trees. You have jackals, you have many different smaller predators getting in on their action to create that balance. And where it gets really fascinating is an interaction with a predator called the wild dogs. So as I was explaining with the idea of this harem and these males, 3 or 4 males going through the herd in a season and covering the females, at some stage the genetic needs to be moved. Animals are lazy. It's all about using as little energy and taking in as much energy so that you can survive long enough to breed. So that means you don't walk miles to another place just to mix genetics. Something's got to work it for you. And wild dogs are coursers. They chase animals down over long periods. Wild dogs will kill and eat up to 3 to 4 impala a day, depending on pack size. I mean, that's detrimental to their numbers. You would think that would have a bad impact. But what's been found is that because they course and chase after these things for long periods, they're splitting the herds, they're sending them into places that they wouldn't have got to, thereby mixing this melting pot of genetics, allowing for the strength and the best genes to survive, while the wild dogs pull off the least important genes or the weakest genes along the way. An amazing, amazing creature. The next we're going to look at is a group called Laphros, and Laphros have 5 distinct species involved in this whole thing. Now, for those of you who have been to Africa, you would have seen definitely the most regal of these 5 types of antelope that we often see is the kudu. They have these incredible spiral-shaped horns. The males have these horns, females do not have horns. Through time and evolution, the males will use these horns to fight, the females don't. They're also not big enough to use horns against something like a lion. So why carry the extra weight when you don't need to? There's a big difference between a horn and an antler. In the northern hemisphere, a lot of the antelope or deer there have antlers. Because of severe winters, it is not energy efficient to keep these things on your head. So you grow antlers in the summer, you use them for fighting and rutting, then at the end of summer they fall off and you start again the next summer. For antelope, these are horns. These are bony extrusions that are covered by keratin. There's blood flow through these horns, and these are permanent. They grow throughout their lives. And like I say, these horns can be used to great effect for fighting. And the corkscrew nature of these horns has left a lot of these guys wanting, because what ends up happening is the corkscrew gets caught in between one another, and through then flicking the neck or getting it in the wrong position, one has been known to break another one's neck, leaving a 2-for-1 special for the next predator that comes along, because the other guy can't get loose from that knot without both parties moving. So this is quite a severe way of doing things. They are more adapted towards feeding in foliage, and because of their leaf eaters, where your impala are mixed feeders, they'll eat grass and leaves. These guys are predominantly leaf eaters, sometimes feeding on a bit of grass along the way. But because of this fact that they eat leaves, they're often in denser foliage. And they're not Superman. They don't have X-ray vision. They cannot see through a tree, but you can hear through trees. So they've evolved these massive ears to be able to be like satellite dishes and listen out for different animals that might be approaching. On top of this, they've also utilized it, this pink coloration that you see, as a way of thermoregulation. Air will blow over these blood-rich ear pits, and it will cool that blood, thereby cooling their body. Just another way to cool their systems down. The other thing that is very well seen throughout this family are stripes and spots on their back. This is what we call disruptive markings. It breaks the body into smaller pieces, making it more difficult for, say, a lion or a leopard to piece this puzzle together. It now becomes a puzzle. Even around the face, these markings cut across the eye, trying to separate the eye from the body so that it becomes more hidden within this denser foliage within which it lives. Along the rivers, we often find, and where lodges are, we will often find the bushbuck. These little guys love the riverine areas, moving along, browsing through the very rich foliage that's along there. Again, stripes and spots to break the body up. The male a little darker than the female. And there are old hunting stories that this animal took many hunters' lives. As long as they were trying to pursue the animal, the males would often attack and spear and gore their attacker. Now, in saying so, I watched 4 young cheetahs going out on a hunt, and they were trying to get into these bushbuck, went down, and one bushbuck fought off 4 male cheetah just with those horns. He came out all guns blazing. He wasn't letting anyone get to his behind today. So very, very powerful creatures. Another close cousin is a nyala, and this is a nyala bull, the dark one with chocolate brown fur, and the female, which is more of a russet red color. And for a long time, people thought these antelope were actually different antelope. They weren't part of the same thing until science sort of saw them doing their business and making babies and watching how the young males would change later on. But they're actually the splitting point of all antelope. At the point of 100 kilograms, anything below that is a ram and a ewe for a male and a female. Anything above that is a bull and a cow. This is a nyala bull and a nyala ewe that fall both sides of that spectrum. And when the babies come out, all of them look like mom. They stay looking like mom. Even the young boys stay looking like mom till they're much bigger, so that there's less competition with the males, because the males will kill them if they see that there's another male in the herd. The big cousin of all of these guys is a antelope called an eland. Now, an eland can get to over 2,000 pounds. A massive antelope with a great ability to survive. They live in harsher areas, often drier areas. They can survive in wetter areas, but they're often in drier areas. And one of the ways they deal with these hotter areas and drier areas is they prefer to feed at night. One, where the plant, actually because the sun's gone away, they will send water to the leaves, so there's more moisture available to them in those leaves that they're eating. And then secondly, as thermoregulation, the ears aren't really going to help in a hot location. Sweating is not going to help in a dry location. So they've stopped sweating. They don't sweat. They'd rather let their body temperature heat up to an extremely high heat during the day, and then at night they will release that heat and allow it to dissipate, because often in the dry areas what you have is this very hot daytime temperature and a very cold nighttime temperature. So it allows them to thermoregulate. The other crazy thing about these guys is, like, this is a big bull here. He, at over 2,000 pounds, can clear a fence that's 7 foot high. A youngster will clear a fence that's 9 foot high, all from a standing start. Can you imagine the power in these animals? And because they're not the best runners in the world, if there is a moment where they're attacked by lions or something along those lines, they won't run. They'll actually bunch up and fight things off with their horns, keeping the youngsters in the middle to protect them from everything else. Now, the fifth and last one that I'm going to talk about of this family is this beautiful creature here. Now, this is called a Citatunga. Now, Citatunga lives within the Okavango Delta, within the reed beds. And there's very little known about these guys because they are so shy. They literally live on floating reed beds, only coming to the ground and going up onto the banks at night, where they can feed under cover of darkness on the leaves and then retreat back to these reed beds. They're very efficient swimmers, able to feed sort of at shoulder length, and will often hide by submerging every part of themselves except their nostrils. This photo was taken on a private trip with NatHab. I went out with one guest for a photographic mission. It was really awesome, but it was really dry in the Delta. It was a major drought. We were at a camp that was supposedly a water camp, which means there's water and boat activities all year round. When we arrived at the camp, all the boats were on the ground and not on the water, and this guy was forced to come out. I was so confused when I saw him, but it was a privilege nonetheless. We're now going to jump to a bigger antelope called a waterbuck. And as his name suggests, a waterbuck lives in and around close to water. They will often use water to retreat from predators. Now, these horns, as you can see, are ridged and ribbed, will do some great damage, specifically when they fight. If these males come to a fight, which is not very often, it can often lead to death just because of the shape of the horns and the ferocity with which they fight. Again, females have no horns, males have horns. And if you look around their necks, this very bushy fur that lives around the neck like this. Now, within the fur, each of those hairs are hollow. It allows for extra buoyancy while they're swimming, and it keeps their head above water. A crazy thought. Now, for a long time, when hunters were to go out and try and get the meat gets incredibly tainted because they have these oil glands that if the oil touches the meat goes basically rancid. It's horrible. And what they've adapted this for is it's actually a waterproof coating that they put over their coats. It's got quite a pungent smell. So if a waterbuck is lying down, or you go to where a waterbuck was lying down, just rub your hand and smell it. It's a very strong pungent odor that's on it. And a lot of time people thought this is a great thing. Because they retreat from these bigger predators into the water, it must be a crocodile deterrent. So this would obviously slick. The crocodile would taste this, go, no, that's not good. That guy's still past his sell-by date. I'm not going to be getting in touch with that thing. But I had that numerous times put to rest, that myth, because we saw a young waterbuck that was close to the water. One day, a crocodile lunged at it, gripped. Unfortunately for the young waterbuck, it disemboweled it, so it was standing there and it was not having the best day of its life, even though it was his last. And the crocodile kept on trying to come out to get it, but what was fascinating is from that same waterhole, a hippo kept on coming and chasing the crocodile away, almost like it was giving the young waterbuck a chance. But unfortunately, it succumbed to its injuries and life went on through things eating it. There are some smaller antelope, our dwarf antelope, which have some very cool adaptations. So the first one is a clip springer. I'm going to go back there so you can see it. It basically clip, KLIP means rock, and springer means jumper in Afrikaans. And this guy has lived his life, they live their life on the rocks. They are literally standing on the tippy toes of their hooves, and just because of the tiny amount of surface area that's on there, the pressure is massive. It allows them to hold on to those rocks and to evade any predators through using the rocks as their way to slow the predators down. They also have these very big preorbital glands, before orbit I, and these glands are used to mark territory. They live in monogamous pairs, mate for life. Sometimes the male's lucky or unlucky, depending on which way you look at it, because they can have two wives in that pairing, or triplets, sorry. And these guys will browse on leaves within those environments and move around. Often fall prey to things like your eagles, and then leopards will definitely go after them. Other predators really struggle with that whole thing, but it's just fascinating watching them hop from rock to rock and that incredible dexterity through these amazing places. The next antelope, or miniature antelope, that we're going to talk about is a steenbok. And this is a gigantic male. He's probably about 15 inches tall, so he's not very big. He's got huge horns, this guy, and the female has none. They also have a preorbital gland, which can be seen a little bit in here, but they've never been seen to use it, which is quite funny after we've spoken about this territorial marking. These guys, especially in Kruger National Park, where I spent most of my time guiding, have very small territories. We're talking 500 square meters. So I mean, tiny little areas that they run around in. That would be 90 yards by 90 yards. I mean, it's really not the hugest amount of space to move around in. And they're very selective browsers. They will look for specific trees. They can mate for life if there are, if the vegetation in the area is in good enough condition. If not, they'll be solitary and then go looking for mates at different times. But because of these tiny territories that they hold, even when a predator chases them, they want to stick within the bounds of this territory because they know it like the back of their hand. So they'll zigzag in and out and trying to do different things. And when they're going to urinate and defecate, they will actually mix it all together. And they're a bit conscious of what they do. So they'll dig a hole, then they'll go in the hole and then cover that up. Now, this mixing is one way of strengthening the scent of your presence for other steenbok, and the hiding of it is also a way, of deterring predators because of the fact that they can't see the defecation. And they'll sit very still. Their camouflage is excellent in their bits, and if the predator gets close, they'll do a sudden dash to try and get to safety. The last of these smaller antelope is called a duiker. Now, duiker is again an Afrikaans word which means diver. And like I said with the steenbok, they will sit dead still. The camouflage is spectacular out there. And they'll sit dead still waiting. And if the predator gets too close, he'll suddenly jump out and do these big jumps, diving through the bush, going and then stop suddenly and disappear into the background, because that camouflage works so well. And the predator would have been, first off, a bit surprised at this noise, this initial jump, then go, oh, it's food, and oh, wait, where's the food gone? It stopped, I can't see it. And then this hunt would carry on, and hopefully at that stage, the duiker would have a good piece of escape to do from there. Now, these guys, of all the antelope, are the least herbivorous. So I say that because 10% of their diet consists of meat. They have been seen eating off of carcasses, carrion off of carcasses, eating worms and caterpillars, catching birds, eating eggs. For an antelope, that blows my mind. The first time I heard that, I nearly fell over. The other moment that I had when I nearly fell over with one of these was a guest interaction, and I hope that guest is not listening tonight, but I had a guest ask me once, we pulled up to one of these and they said, Richard, am I right to say that this animal is extinct? So I had to turn around quickly and have a look at them to see if they were being serious. But they were, and I don't think they had the full grasp of the word, what the word extinct meant. Fortunately, I told them that they were okay. These were the last two, and they would probably procreate and carry on from there. The last of our antelope is probably the rarest to see in South Africa, at least. There are a few camps where they have better numbers, but this is the Sable Antelope, and these guys are active morning and evening. They move around. The males are very territorial. This is a big bull with a black, in Afrikaans we call him a black-white stomach, a swart-wit pens is its direct name. It has these huge sickle-shaped horns. It is a big antelope that has been known to fight off lions in any hunt. They will often back themselves into thorn bushes and then use those horns to fend off whatever's trying to get to it. And because it's using so little energy, the lions will get tired and then move off eventually. Now, herds can be anything up to about 30 animals, sometimes at the end of the dry season extending to somewhere around 200 animals. And it might seem weird that I'm saying this, but the current status of these animals in Kruger National Park, they are assumed to be around 250 animals left in 5.5 million acres. They've been wiped out. And as beautiful as they are, one of the reserves that we go to on our hidden South Africa trips, Mala Mala being the African word for the sable, has infrequent sightings of these guys, especially this time of the year. I have literally just returned from a trip there, and we got to see one male on the banks. We actually saw the lion stalking it, which in one sense you're going, lion hunting sable, this is crazy. This could be the coolest sighting ever and the rarest sighting ever. And on the other hand, you're going, 250 sable, run sable, run. So yeah, you get caught between a rock and a hard place. But to explain the ecology and the impact that people have in trying to help, Kruger National Park was one of the first parks ever declared in the world. I think Yellowstone was the first, and then Kruger National Park was the second. It was proclaimed in about 1896. And at this time, the idea behind this putting this piece of land away was all based around, we're hunting these animals, we need to save a place so we don't hunt all of them out. And oh wait, lions and leopards are also hunting them, so we need to shoot them too because that's a problem. They're now hunting, they're doing our hunting for us, so this is a problem. We didn't understand the idea of balance. And through the years of ecology and change, we still don't understand the idea of balance. We understand that there's balance. We don't understand how it balances. What is the golden thread? How does it pull through? Where does it impact? So this beautiful place called Kruger National Park was proclaimed. In the early 1900s, people started to come and bring their cars to view the game. It became this magical idea that you could actually come out and see animals in their wild environment. And in the dry areas of Kruger National Park, what they said was, oh, let's try and put in some water holes so that these animals have a place to go drink, because this is a good thing. This is very dry here. These animals are going to dehydrate, so we need to pump some water holes. So through the years, they installed 365 artificial water holes through the Kruger National Park. Great idea. Fantastic. People can pull into water holes. There's always activity going on around these places. Great idea. Animals will be hydrated even in a drought. Let's do this. What they didn't understand was the ecological knock-on effect it was going to have. Water-dependent species like our Impala and wildebeest were now able to move further afield from their places of origin to these new places that now had a permanent water source. They were then able to graze in these areas and graze the grasses shorter. Along with that came the water-dependent predators, your hyenas, your spotted hyenas at least, your lions and your leopards, which were never able to extend those territories or stick in those areas for long enough because they'd have to go back to more water-rich places. Things like cheetah, brown hyena, aardwolf were all home in these areas, these dry areas where the bigger predators couldn't get to. So now we have the new lawnmowers that have come in and start to feed on the grasses and cut the grasses shorter. Our sable antelope and another very rare antelope called the Rhone Antelope, believed to number around between 50 and 90 individuals in the entirety of the Kruger National Park, were now put under severe pressure. Because the grasses were chewed shorter, they hide their babies for the first few months of their lives in these longer, less palatable grasses. And now the grasses were short. It meant that the babies were exposed. It meant that predators like cheetah, like hyenas, lions, and leopards could walk around and just pick them off. So their numbers started to decline. Cheetah suffered the same fate because of the fact that their competition with the other bigger predators had now increased. Animals that couldn't get there previously were now in this habitat and moving towards it. So if we're lucky, when we go to these places like Mala Mala, especially when it's dry like it is now, these animals need to make a huge trek. And it's a fascinating thing to watch. I've watched a herd of around 20 individuals push through, and we followed them for about 2 hours as they moved down. Very shy antelope, so we're keeping a great big distance as opposed to any other antelope that we're normally driving through and inundated and have lots of them around. These guys you have to treat with a bit of respect, and you see them and they move. This was one guy that stopped to have a look at us as they were moving down towards the Sand River. And now they're entering a massive predator zone because it's dry. And this is exactly what happened a few days ago. It's dry, they're thirsty, they need the water. The lions know that something's coming down to drink because it's hot, it's dry, and they need water. So the sable, as they're approaching, they're very nervous of that water edge, and they sit, and it can take them hours to pluck up the courage to go down. And when they get down to the river, they literally suck on the water for maybe 60 seconds and turn around and march back into Kruger National Park, back to their dry area to avoid the predators all over again with 1 minute's worth of drinking behind them. Crazy, crazy, crazy creatures. So, Colby, I'm ready for some questions if there are any.
Yes, there sure are, Richard. Before we start the Q&A, though, I'd like to remind everybody that you can submit your own questions via the questions field in the control panel. So let's start with impalas, Richard. You teed up a couple questions from folks here in your introduction. So you mentioned that they haven't needed to evolve for the past 3 million years. Why is that? What pressures were absent that didn't cause them to evolve?
I think it's not got to do with pressures that were absent. The pressures have remained stable pretty much, but they have such good functional use of what their genetics are already doing. They're cleaning their parasites, they're breeding successfully every year, they have good access to food because they can mixed feed. They don't have any of those other needs to change. Predators haven't changed that much over that time. They might have got smaller or changed habitat a bit, but again, the fact that they're mixed feeders has allowed them to just stay the course. So you'll get them from very dry areas to very wet areas and all moved across different types of habitats just because of this level of effective use of time, effective use of their bodies, and no need to change any of that.
All right, very good. So you were mentioning how a lot of these antelope, the males are fighting for various reasons using their horns. Do they ever inflict mortal wounds on each other? Like, how civilized is their fighting?
There's nothing civilized about it. There are definite mortal wounds that occur. I've witnessed fights that have ended in death, specifically in Impala, because that rutting period is quite intense. Again, testosterone goes up, and we all know what boys do when testosterone goes up. The brain goes a little foggy, and these boys are at it and hitting each other. And just one wrong placement of that, a puncture wound in the lung or a heart, can cause a mortal wound. Now, how they would avoid this is you don't want to, I'm not going to go pick a fight with Mike Tyson because that would be unwise. I'm going to lose. So animals have this exact same idea. They use play as a way of figuring out dominance, figuring out where you sit in the pecking order. And you jostle with your friends or the bachelor groups while they're being bachelors, and they're jostling, tussling to see where they are in the pecking order. Only once you reach the top of the pecking order do you start jostling for a herd, at which point it's a little bit more fierce, and hopefully at that stage the guy you're fighting with is a little worn down so you can move him off, because ultimately you're trying to spread your genetics. It's the only time it's worth dying for, because that's your only chance of spreading your genetics. So these fights can end in death, most of the time won't, and even fights for that matter, if we look at something like a nyala or a bushbuck, this nyala was actually posing, but what they'll do is they'll get a phyloerection on their back, and that hair will stand up on end, making them look bigger. And they'll literally circle each other, trying to see who is the biggest of the lot, trying to visually sort out the fight before you put your weapons in. And I think it's quite an intelligent way of doing it.
Indeed. We had some folks curious about the differences, if there are any, between gazelles and antelope.
So gazelle are just a type of antelope. So gazelles are just like a term towards, you get different types of Thompson's gazelle, Grant's gazelle, which occur in East Africa, but are also closely related to the rest of the gazelles, or like springbok would be referred to as another type of gazelle. So yeah, just a different type of antelope within this very large Bovidae family. The family is termed Bovidae because they're bovids, they have 4 stomachs, as I mentioned in the beginning.
So then playing off that one, where does the dik-dik fit into the whole scheme?
So the dik-dik would fall into one of these dwarf antelopes. So it's one of the small antelope, and often found around, we see them often in Tanzania, tiny little things. They have the cutest little faces, often hanging around, but again, adopt the same characteristics of either pairing for life or being solitary, because you're so small that it's safer being small and hidden. Impala sort of reach that point where they're a bit too big to hide on their own. So it's better to have safety in numbers. So you have these herdings, or the herds and harems that occur or get made up during the mating seasons and without that. So the dik-diks will hide away and hope that a predator won't see them, and use surprise, leap and run as fast as you can to the next bush as their method of escape.
So all of these types of antelope, we're used to looking at pictures and seeing them in these plains regions, but are there antelope that live higher in elevation in various places in Africa?
So there are, and your eland are your more specialized for these more drastic environments. There are antelope called blesbuck, which occur in the highlands in the mountains of South Africa. You do get others, but there aren't a whole lot of huge mountain ranges and highlands within South Africa that are, or Southern Africa or Africa, that would need to be populated. There's so much food down the bottom, and there's not that much. They've got the competition level okay, that not everything needs to be pushed up high. We may have a kopje that comes up a couple of 100 meters or a couple of 100 feet above. When the mountains are growing, you'll have smaller things like a dussie or rock hyraxes, which will live in those things and start taking up those niches in those areas up there. But for the most part, like the middle part of South Africa, our Highveld, where currently I'm at almost 5,800 feet sitting in Joburg here. So this would be regarded as almost already high altitude, moving higher up. We don't have a hell of a lot beyond that.
So you've mentioned a number of species of antelope in your presentation, and now we're in the Q&A, and more names are coming up. We have some folks interested in knowing if you know off the top of your head, how many antelope species are in Africa?
Geez, that is a great question. I have no cooking clue. We'd have to definitely ask Dr. Google that one, but there are, a guess would be around at least between 40 and 50 different species. There's so many different little lineages that go along, different antelopes that have split up. We've got oryx, we've got blessbuck, we've got springbok, you've got different types of oryx, you've got different types of blessbuck, you've got hartebeest, we've got, and there's numerous types of hartebeest. You've got buffalo will fall under bovidae, wildebeest will fall under bovidae, even your giraffe, your okapi, all of those are all under one family, which are your four-stomached herbivores that process their food in that specific way. So when you start expanding it out like that, you start seeing these different, the numbers get quite big. I mean, what we went through, 5, 6, 9, 10, 11 just in this presentation. So yeah, I would at least go to 40 or 50, but I'm going to have to get an exact number for you at some stage.
Well, here I have the privileged position of not having to talk and think at the same time. So I went to Google, and it tells us that Africa is indeed the continent of antelope, with 71 different species of antelopes and gazelles in total. And we can compare that to Asia, which has 14. So
wow,
the continent of antelopes. I like that.
That's very cool. Very cool. Okay, so we'll have to do a part 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and
8. Indeed. Richard, you were talking about the man-made water holes and some of the issues around with that. Folks are curious if that is why so many water holes are being moved or rehabilitated in Kruger National Park.
So that is exactly the case that's going on. The 365 water holes that were created are now in a process of being decommissioned one by one. You can't just go, oh crap, we made a mistake, switch off the taps. Because now you've moved all of these animals around, you have to slowly allow them the ability to move their way back to these other areas to then start the process again. And there's definitely been an increase in numbers. I know Rhone dropped to about 30 animals in Kruger National Park, and I think Sable we're down to about 150. So there's definite movement in the right direction of these numbers, but it is vitally important to decommission those and let the environment get back to its old way. Again, the idea on all of this for me is that conservation changes. As we learn more, we learn the mistakes we made. Like I said in the beginning of Kruger, they were killing predators because they thought they were a hindrance to conservation. Meanwhile, they are an integral keystone species to this to be able to create more and balance the system. As we move through this, we learn more about fire, water, space, migration, and how these different things impacted different animals through time. Even Kruger National Park and the way it is set up, it is a skinny park that moves north to south. And a lot of animals used to migrate east to west. The third largest migration in Africa was a wildebeest migration in Kruger National Park, which was stopped by the erection of a fence, which stopped this through movement from east to west to the foothills of the Drakensberg mountain range, where they would feed on the orographic rainfall and the vegetation there, then moving back into Kruger during the summer months when it was rainy and wonderful. So things have changed, our ideas have changed, and I think the further we get down the line of conservation, the more we understand that allowing animals space and allowing animals intelligence to shine so that they can choose the routes they need to go to migrate has a far more positive impact on everything, not just the animals, on the vegetations, on the people, on the rivers, on all parts of the ecology that go around it. Just by giving them the space to do what they naturally do, everything else thrives.
Wonderful answer there. Let's stick with conservation a little bit. You were talking about sable numbers are so low. Can you talk about their situation? How come they're so low? Are they coming back? What is their prognosis?
So like I alluded to, the numbers had dropped so low because of the fact of these water holes. So the grasses were trimmed short, their calves were being eaten and becoming exposed because the grasses were shorter than what they should have been. And as time moves on through this, there is a viable population still available in Kruger National Park to extend those numbers. If necessary, and if it gets to a point, they would be able to import some from other places. It's quite funny that in Southern Africa, there was this incredible, we'll call it a game gold rush, that was driven by hunting, where animals were given a value based on what a hunter would spend to shoot the thing and plant its head on a wall. We're not going to go down the ethical route of this. We'll just talk about the financial, economic route that this all focused on. And what it did was sable became a prize animal, was something that people would pay big money to do. So people started investing and creating these sable bulls that had this immense value to them because they had this genetic of a big horn and a bigger animal, etc. And that people wanted this to be breeding stock to create more stock to be shot. And what ended up happening is nobody shot the stuff. The value of the animals kept climbing, kept climbing, kept climbing, kept climbing, kept climbing. It was a ridiculous moment where a buffalo bull was sold for around $9 million. Yes, one animal was sold for $9 million. Again, and it was thought to be a ghost buy where the owner of the bull bought it under pretense just to try and push the value up of all the stock. So there are thousands of sable in private parks. I was literally driving back from filming some stuff for our virtual safaris we've been doing with NatHab. And along the side of the road, there were 40 sable, all feeding in this farm where people had raised them for the value, the monetary value of not ever being hunted, but just because people have attached that value to it. That market has since collapsed and brought the values down to something realistic because no one was actually getting a value out of it. But yes, there is still potential to move bigger herds from those places into those wilderness areas. You just need the donor who's willing to fork out whatever money is involved to take those herds and put them back into Kruger National Park.
Very good. Thanks for walking us through that. That is the last question we have time for today. Richard, would you like to share any closing comments with us about antelope?
Thank you so much. Thanks, Colby. Thanks, NatHab. And thank you guys for listening. It really has been spectacular. It's always fun having these chats and just exploring new things and hopefully teaching you guys new things that the next time you get out to Africa, you'll be able to appreciate these animals a little bit more. And I look forward to seeing you in our next one.
We look forward to that too. Thank you very much for taking the time to present with us today. I'd also like to thank everyone who tuned in. Join us again tomorrow for our next Daily Dose of Nature. You can check out this week's lineup, including registration links, on our website at nathab.com/webinars. We did record today's presentation and we'll have the replay available on our website shortly. And with that, I will conclude today's talk. Thank you all.
Thank you all.